If I told a thinking person, I have something to show you that you cannot see with your naked eye, I want to show you this star or this microbe, that person would have no problem saying, hey, let me change my lens. Let me get a microscope or a telescope. And with that, I want to see what you're talking about. Well, to see God, you need to be able to change your perspective lens. One of the things that I run into the most often in dealing with atheists is they say, if you'll give me scientific proof, if you'll give me 100% scientific proof, then I will believe in God. And this entire video is set up to prove that. And if you really stand by that, then you'll begin believing in God by the end of this video. So when you say you need scientific proof, I really want to explore that for a moment. What do you mean when you say scientific proof? Do you mean that you want to look at things the way a scientist looks at things? Do you mean you want a data set? Or do you mean you want a repeatable example? When you say you want scientific proof, you pick one of those three options. Now, I've offered the third option repeatedly, and people don't like that. I understand. I get it. So when I say there is the offer of accepting Jesus Christ as your personal Lord, I can't stand that. I understand. Okay, so let's go to the other two possibilities then. Do you mean data set, that you want hard scientific data that God exists? And considering that, I have a few questions to ask about that. Number one, are you asking for comprehensive data, complete data? Now, if we logically think through that, that can't happen anyway. If God did exist, how could somebody give you all the comprehensive, complete data of his existence? So logically, that's probably not what you're asking for. But that puts us into a default position with data, which means that we are now going to be in an incomplete data position. And as such, the best that we can do then is to sample the data and then extrapolate about what it means. And this is the way science does often, is they sample things that are too large to actually get complete data on, and then they extrapolate. Just so we're very clear, this is guessing. Now, you can say there seems to be less guessing because the more that you sample, then you begin to show a pattern. Sure, but where does it place us? It places data that is incomplete at guessing. And I'm talking about science as well as theology. So hold on to your horses for a second. But also, do you mean that you want data that is without conflict? Is that what you mean? You want data that has no conflicting evidence? So obviously you don't want to go there because there's always scientific things that have conflicting data points. But probably what someone means is, no, I want well-researched data. That's what I mean by scientific data. Well, do you realize that well-researched scientific data is still incomplete and requires sampling and guessing and often yields conflicting data? Is that the kind of scientific proof that you want? Well, maybe that's not really where we want to go with this. What I'm trying to get across to you is that science isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It isn't a one-size-fits-all technique. Science typically works well in an isolated, contained, repeatable scenario, and then it can yield some amazing results. If you think about the things that have come about technology-wise from our continual experimentation, sure, then science makes gains in those areas. But does the scientific technique work across life? Like, what about things that are simply too large to grasp, to fully handle for science to grasp? So one of the things you might not be aware of or might not have thought about is that once you start getting outside of the lab, science really starts to lose a grasp. And so, for instance, like when you think about how many gallons are in the ocean, just as an off example, the best we're ever going to do is sample and guess at least for the next hundreds and thousands of years, until somebody can get and maybe some satellites up into the air that aren't in elliptical degrading orbits that can send a signal that goes through atmospheric resistance, solar resistance and atmospheric resistance, and then the water resistance, and hits the surface perfectly and comes back, and you get a complete map of the ocean. You get the picture. Like, we're going to have to guess at maybe what the volume of the ocean is. And that kind of puts us in a place where we begin to realize that we kind of have to be okay with not knowing everything. And this also jumps over into the things that are too small to actually study. When you get into really microscopic pieces of particles of atoms, and when you begin to jump into that new realm of quantum physics, there all of a sudden is models, and they are yielding, some conflicting evidence. And there's things that are just not quite knowable at this point. So what about science also? When you go to study something like history, science really can't study history. You might study testimonies or written testimonies or artifacts, but you're never going to be able to quite study time-bound issues. Or what about science is not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to art and music. Sure, you can take some scientific metrics and place it onto things like art and music and come about with some possible general theories about what beauty may or may not be, or about what people prefer or not prefer. But as soon as you begin to do this, you're going to find out that people are unique and view things differently, and that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. You will find people that like things that other people do not, and so that produces conflicting data. And that opens up a whole new problem. We find that science really begins to stumble and falter when it gets into surveying people, not just because of the volume of people on this planet, not just because of the diversity of cultures and religions, but because of the nature of human beings in and of themselves and how diverse they are. And so that opens up a terrible can of worms. So your scientific technique doesn't fit all circumstances to begin with. And so science is not a one-size-fits-all approach. On top of that, do you mean that you would, if we can't go with repeatable experiment because you don't want to participate in that, and we can't go with the data information per se because it's incomplete and it's guessing and it presents conflicting data, maybe what you mean is I want scientific evidence, I want to view things the way a scientist would. So you mean you want to guess from previous data? Like, this is what scientists do, is they take data that they learned from someone else, information they gathered from someone else, and then they begin to make guesses going forwards. Now, this is at times really detrimental. I know of a gentleman who for years and years did research with his hypothesis and then found out his groundwork data was wrong. And so just because you have information doesn't mean you're going to make progress. And so do you mean science like a scientist would do? Well, we also know that when they make their hypotheses and they begin to conduct their experiments, one thing we need to realize is that they fail and fail and fail and fail. And I've actually had some people in some past videos wanted to debate this that really didn't get into the research of how many times we have to fail at trying something in science before we make a breakthrough. What makes it useful is that it is recording how many times and where we failed at, so that we don't repeat that, so that we hopefully by some luck can make some good progress. But let's give scientists due. Once it does find that, once it finds something that is repeatable and testable and maybe dependable, does that really mean it will always be this way? What is there saying that on the 3 billionth time that this is done, that it will actually continue in that fashion? We're guessing that it will continue in that fashion. How do we know at Christmas this year of 2024 that time doesn't alter or begin to reverse and everything begins to operate in some backwards fashion? Or how do we know that sometime before the end of 2024 that lead quits operating in the way it's always operated and now picks up a different pattern? We're making guesses based off of what seems to be repeatable. Are you talking about approaching things like a scientist would approach things? Like, this is the way it's always been, so it probably will always be this way. Is that what you mean? Well, what about when science and scientists come into something like fibromyalgia, which is a disease of, pain and discomfort and overly sensitive and I can't sleep, etc. It is so confusing and so nebulous that it turns them in circles. But let me come back to that in just a second. What I want to really get across is that science is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Just because it works well in this limited area over here does not mean it touches or addresses at all every area of life. And so somebody wants to hold up science like it should be the measurement for life, really doesn't see all the holes in it. And let me give this comparison. So let's say that you have found a technique that works in the stock market, buy low, sell high. Man, and that works really well. Like when you can buy something low and sell high in the stock market, you make a killing. But what about when the stock market is in a bull run? At that point, you are going to lose all opportunities of making any kind of gains. Or what if you take the buy low, sell high technique and apply it to your romance life where, you're going to buy things really cheaply and then you're going to go sell them to your spouse at a really high thing. Does that work? Like, I'm going to buy these chocolates cheap and I'm going to sell them to you for a profit. Or does that work with your children? Does that work with your friends? Does that work with the homeless? Like, oh, I bought a sleeping bag for this man, and I'm only going to charge him an upcharge of 25%. Or what about third world countries as we send them aid and we send them, ways to have clean drinking water or food, and we're only going to charge a little bit on the top? Well, actually, it's buy low, sell high, so I need to charge them a lot on the top. Or what about, let's say I am the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I want to really refine our upper ranks, and I'm going to bring in a speaker that can up our quality, and he is going to unify us in ways never before seen. Do I buy low, sell high at that point? Do I go in and go into the Speakers Bureau, the International Speakers Bureau, and find the cheapest person on the payroll to come in and boost my Fortune 500 company? Does it work then? Or what if I'm at a competitive auction where they're selling Rembrandt and Picasso? Is your buy low, sell high strategy going to work? No. Just because you have a technique that works in one area does not mean it works across the board. Science yields different levels of insight in different circumstances. So back to fibromyalgia and some of the science of it. It is treated by scientists and doctors as real because of the testimony of people. Really? Yes. Now, because of the testimony of people, here's the way it started. Roughly in the 1960s, when this was first started becoming reported, it was actually treated more of like a psychosomatic condition, like maybe your mind was creating this. But as time has gone on, it's like there are people that really experience this, and they keep coming out of the woodwork, and so it must be a real condition. To put it in the terms of one of my friends who has passed away at this point, he was a nurse practitioner, and he said fibromyalgia is the name, the category, the label for when you've got a patient that has something wrong with them, and they don't know what's wrong with them, and you can't figure out what's wrong with them, so you give them that diagnosis so they can have some sort of recourse, which is, pain management. But, and some will go, no, there's actual symptoms to this. Well, if you say there are symptoms to this, then like they do brain scans or looking at the neurology of a person, they're like, oh, well, it's different when they have fibromyalgia. Well, the same thing is also true of a person that has a religious experience. Oh, their brain waves are different, or this, that, or the other. So what is it really telling us? I want to read a few things to you. One of the first ones comes from Nature, the online website. Probably, I think it started as a magazine, but the title is Emotion Regulation and the Salience Network, a hypothetical interactive model of fibromyalgia. It's published in the 5th of December 2022, and here's the abstract on it. Fibromyalgia is characterized by widespread pain, fatigue, sleep disturbances, and other symptoms, and has substantial socioeconomic impact. Currently, biomedical and psychosocial treatments are unsatisfactory for many patients, and treatment progress has been hindered by the lack of clear understanding of the pathogenesis of fibromyalgia. We present here a model of fibromyalgia that integrates current psychosocial and neurophysiological observations. We propose that an imbalance is in emotion regulation, reflected by an overactive threat system and underactive soothing system, might keep the salience network, also known as the mid-singulo-insular network, sorry for murdering that, in a continuous alert mode, and this hyperactivation in conjunction with other mechanisms contributes to fibromyalgia. This proposed integrative model, which we term the fibromyalgia imbalance of threat and soothing systems model, should be viewed as a working hypothesis with limited supporting evidence available. Did you get that? Limited supporting evidence available. We hope, however, this model will shed new light on existing psychosocial and biological observations and inspire future research to address the many gaps in our knowledge about fibromyalgia, ultimately stimulating the development of novel therapeutic interventions. Well then, man, we have this library of open access material at the National Institute of Health or the National Library of Sciences. If you jump over to their website and look up fibromyalgia, and you read fibromyalgia an in-depth read, it says, under the overview of fibromyalgia, scientists do not fully understand what causes it. But people with the disorder have a high sensitivity to pain. Under the section of who gets fibromyalgia, anyone can get fibromyalgia, but more women get it than men. It can affect people of any age, even children, but it usually starts in middle age, and the chance of having it increases as you get older. It occurs in people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds. Fibromyalgia tends to run in families, and some scientists believe that certain genes could make you more likely to develop it. Ooh, we're on to something. However, the disorder also occurs in people with no family history of the disorders, so we're not really on to anything. Under causes of fibromyalgia, the cause of fibromyalgia is not known. But studies show that people with the disorder have a heightened sensitivity to pain, so they feel pain when others do not. Brain imaging studies and other research have uncovered evidence of altered signaling in neural pathways that transmit and receive pain in people with fibromyalgia. Again, like I was telling you, that religious people having experienced this too, you can photograph these same kind of occurrences that are happening, but you don't necessarily know where the source is. These changes may also contribute to fatigue, sleep disturbances, and cognitive problems that many people with this disorder experience. Fibromyalgia tends to run in families, so genetic factors are likely contribute to the disorder. Genetics saves us. There's a physical source here. There's a physical reason. But little is known for sure about the scientific genes involved. So we're not really certain of that. And we already heard the other story about the family lines not really lining up. Researchers believe that environmental factors also may play a role in the person's risk of developing the disorder. The environmental triggers may include having a disease that causes pain, such as rheumatoid arthritis, or mental health problems such as anxiety or depression. I don't know where it's coming from. Also, at the bottom of that article in NIH, under just looking up fibromyalgia, clicking on the first thing that pops up, doctors do not know what causes fibromyalgia. People with this disorder tend to be sensitive to pain. What is pain? Like, what is pain? We report it. I say I've got it. Do you have it? Have you ever heard about the people that get in car accidents with their neck and their back? And since you can't really tell if a person is having pain or not having pain, you kind of have to pay them because they probably are having pain because it gets really, really crazy. We want to approach this like scientists, right? Scientific proof. What about from the NIH technical side? I looked up fibromyalgia, and I think it was the book Stat Pearls. It's by Juhi Bhargava and John A. Hurley. And it says the last update was June 11th, 2023, and it's under etiology, or the source, Fibromyalgia is a chronic pain disorder with an unknown etiology. There is no evidence of any single event that causes this condition. Instead, it is triggered or aggravated by multiple physical and or emotional stressors. Something's causing it, some combination, which include infections as well as emotional and physical trauma. Like, some people have physical trauma, but they don't have the emotional amplitude of it or something. Or some people have an infection, but they don't have the other, so we don't really know where it's coming from. Fibromyalgia is considered a disorder of pain regulation, often classified under central sensitization. Some studies have shown that genetic predisposition of fibromyalgia, though there is no documentation of a definitive candidate gene. Pain and sensory processing alteration in the central nervous system are present in fibromyalgia. Patients receive noxious stimuli with pain as being painful at lower levels of physical stimulation compared to healthy controls. Let's just stop there. One more. If you also go over to the NIH section and look up the evolution of fibromyalgia, its concepts and its criteria in 2021, November 13, by Frederick Wolf and Johann J. Rasker. I really want you to pay attention to this because if you say, I want scientific evidence, like I want to look at this the way a scientist would. Okay, here's the way scientists look at some things because the scientific tactic or the scientific metric does not apply evenly across life. And so I want you to see how ambiguous this gets. In their section, under review, it says, I know it when I see it. In 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, and I want to drop this for a second. There's some that are going to say, I didn't present scientific evidence because I presented a corollary. Well, I'm showing you how scientists present things. And right here, we're talking about a U.S. Supreme Court Justice when we're talking about medical stuff. There's a corollary. This is the way scientists do things. So in 1964, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, in what would become one of the most famous phrases in the entire history of the Supreme Court, wrote of pornography that perhaps he could never succeed intelligibly in defining it. But I know it when I see it. How does one become a Supreme Court Justice without at least having a little bit of intelligence about them and having climbed the ranks? Like, maybe you can make your political argument about that, but Supreme Court justices are pretty thoroughly screened and they are heavily vetted, and they have to know some things about law and intelligence and logic. And he says, well, I don't think I could succeed intelligibly in defining it, but I know it when I see it, talking about pornography. The know it when I see it idea also characterized early physician authors writing about fibromyalgia, as they could not intelligibly define fibromyalgia. Now, you've really got to understand there are clinics across the U.S. in every medical center in the country, in hospitals, all the doctors, therapists, rheumatologists, sleep therapists, pain medication managers, mental health specialists, all of them are familiar with the term fibromyalgia, and they know what it is as it's reported. And they believe and treat it as if it is real because of the reporting of it. But they have this, I know it when I see it, understanding. That's the way it started. Now I want you to just hang on. The I know it when I see it idea also characterized early physicians writing about fibromyalgia as they could not intelligibly define fibromyalgia, but knew it when they saw it. 50 years later, Stewart's idea of what was and was not pornography has long since been abandoned as society has changed its mind about what was permissible. I don't think they have, but that's this person's opinion. However, for fibromyalgia, many physicians, including physicians experts, still hew to the idea of, I know it when I see it. This was written in 2021. I can't intelligibly describe it, but I know what fibromyalgia is when I see it. You want to do this like scientists and doctors. What we know for certain is that every set of published fibromyalgia criteria, beginning with Smith and Moldavsky in 1976, identified different groups of patients. There are different ones that have this and ones that don't. Even in 2021, two sets of expert research criteria had an unsatisfactory agreement, with one set identifying 73% more individuals with fibromyalgia in the general population study than the other. Oh, you want to do things like science, like data sets. Well, here you've got experts in both fields independently researching this project on fibromyalgia, and their results are only 73% different. In addition, general physicians' knowledge about fibromyalgia and the de facto diagnostic agreement with published criteria was and is poor, even in specialty clinics. Where do you go for fibromyalgia? Well, you go to your doctor and then he gives you that catch-all, label, oh, it's fibromyalgia. I don't really know what to do with you, so I'm going to send you to the specialist. And when there's nobody to go to beyond the specialist. They are the premier ones dealing with this. And he says, in addition, general physicians' knowledge about fibromyalgia and the de facto diagnostic agreement with published criteria was and is poor. Even in specialty clinics, in community practice, I know it when I see it is the rule. So it is very curious to me how when atheists want to slap these what do you call it? These hurdles or these roadblocks or these metrics against Christianity. They're like, well, I've got this standard for you to meet. I want you to meet my preferences by scientific data. I want you to give me scientific proof. What do you mean by that? If you really mean scientific proof, I've just given you an example of how scientific proof works. Only about 4 to 5% of the American population, and roughly the same percentages in other countries, report fibromyalgia. With such a small reporting, it is still classified as a real disease that you can get treatment for, that doctors will help you as best they can with, and they can deal with the symptoms of it. But they treat it as real even with a smaller proportion of the population reporting it than people that report religious experiences. So it seems like if somebody will accept fibromyalgia as being real because people give a testimony of it, even though they don't know the source, but then when it jumps over to God and people claiming by testimony that they sense him, even though nobody can quite point to a physical source, it seems like there's a little bit of bias going on about what we will actually accept. It's not really that we want a scientific metric. What we want is some kind of way to disprove the concept of God. And so we think that is scientific application until we find out that the scientific metric, when applied across the board, does not always yield the same results. And in some places, it gives conflicting evidence, it gives incomplete evidence, it gives biased evidence, it gives guesswork evidence. And if that's what you're talking about, then the proof that you need to believe that God exists has already been handed to you. Why not give him the chance that he deserves?